another episode of I Love Data Fridays here at the International Data Evaluation Center on the campuses of the Ohio State University. And ladies and gentlemen, so good to see you. Welcome to another episode of I Love Data Fridays, episode 52. And today we'll be doing our review of the tables and figures in your IDEC annual reports. But before we get to that, hey, who's talking data to you? Well, of course, you've got me, Jeff Breimer-Bashore, Director and Co-Principal Investigator here at the International Data Evaluation Center. So let's get to an overview of what's going down today. Of course, as I said earlier, the whole episode is going to be focusing on the tables and figures in your annual report. But before we get to that, we're going to review just a quick review of some of the important dates and other information that has been updated a little bit since we last had our episode 51 of I Love Data Fridays. Then we're just going to briefly review about what's new about the annual reports. If you want an in-depth review of that, you can go back to our last episode, episode 51. Here's a link right up here, and you can watch that again. Then I'm going to briefly talk about the guide to our annual results packet. So that is the combination of the reports that you get from IDEC at the end of the year. This is a downloadable guide for you. Then a brief word about the compatibility of your reports with those of you using Google Docs and the whole Google Drive infrastructure. And then we are going to review each of the tables and figures and your reports this year. And we will show variations between reading recovery and literacy lessons reports. And then we are going to practice making observations with our data. So as we review each table, I am going to just do some general observations of the data. And the purpose here is not to come with any answers. It's just to observe what the data is telling us so we can practice using our data. All right, well, let's get to it and let's talk a little data.
I love Data Friday!
All right, so let's just briefly review data submission and the running of your reports. So you can start submitting your data May 15th. So that as of the recording of this video, May 15th is certainly come and gone, and some of you have already started submitting your data. Just know that IDEC is delaying the running of your annual reports to June 14th. We covered that. The reason why in our last episode of I Love Data Fridays, we're just trying to get as much national data in as we can. So we'll start running reports on June 14th. The last day to submit your data to IDEC for this school year will be August 6th, 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you do need to get reports before June 14th, just contact the help desk and we can get them to you. So you can reach us at helpdesk@idecweb.us. So what's new about the annual reports this year? So just a brief overview. We've redesigned the reports this year to make it easier to spot anomalies in your data, things that look different. We've done this by providing you with multiple years of data in your report so you can start to see trends. And we've also have provided you with national data so you can compare your implementation to the typical implementation. So that national data allows us to get an understanding of what the typical implementation looks like. And then we have actually removed some tables and figures from the reports that you might be used to seeing. We've cut down on some of the data bloat. So this way, you're not being distracted by too much data. We're just trying to focus on the data that allows us to see trends in our data. And the whole purpose is to sort of reinvigorate the questioning of why. So the reports, with the reports being redesigned to spot anomalies, now they've sort of also been redesigned to facilitate data investigation and have a much easier time being paired with some of our on-demand reports. So you can use your annual reports and your on-demand reports together to conduct this data investigation. Along with this video that you're watching today, we also have a guide to your annual results packet that we have updated. And you can just go over to the IDEC website and you can look for the guide to the tables and figures. That's just over at idecweb.us/publications.aspx. And you will see it right there and you can download it. And this will just make a nice companion as you are going through your reports this year. Now, many of you are in school districts that make use of Google Docs and the Google Drive infrastructure and have been provided Chromebooks. IDEC has been working not only when redesigning the reports, but also working very hard to get the reports to work within Google Docs when you import them into Google Docs. But one thing I will note is that as the recording of this I Love Data Fridays, we are still having some issues with the executive summaries looking okay or importing okay into Google Docs. It is the whole two-column design that is giving us some problems. But we're working that. But for the most of our reports, that you can import them into Google Docs, and you don't have to really do any extra formatting. They will look good. All right, so I'm done with our opening comments and stuff. So let's get right into it and looking at the tables in your reports. So our first table is Table 1, and Table 1 shows the count of entities participating in your implementation. In this example, just know that Reading Recovery, DLL, Literacy Lessons, and RR Eligible all have the same Table 1. So this example will apply to all of the reports that you get from IDEC. You'll see here in the first column that we have all of the entities participating in your implementation. Once again, this example table shows data for a sample site. So we see the number of districts, the number of schools, the number of teacher leaders, the number of teachers, and reading recovery students. As we mentioned earlier, most of all of our tables and figures this year now include 3 years of data, so we can see that in the next column, we have data from 2 years ago, the 2018-19 school year. Next column over are data from last year, the 2019-20 school year. And then finally, in the last column on the right-hand side, we have data from our current school year, the 2020 school year. So now, if you have your data in front of you, your Table 1, let's do a quick example of just making some observations about our data. And specifically, we're going to look at the teachers row. So you can see in this example, in 2018-19, this site had 117 teachers. In 2019-20, that dropped by 1, and the site had 116 teachers. And then in this year, 2020-21, the site's number of teachers dropped again by 3, and this year they had 113 teachers. So you can see how the number of teachers have changed over time. Now, remember, we're just making an observation. We are not drawing any conclusion. We're merely just observing some facts. All right, let's move on to our next table. Okay, next up is Table 2. And Table 2 is showing you the description of the students that you served in your implementation. This particular example below that you see on the screen is showing the description of reading recovery students. And I guess by description, what we're saying is the demographic makeup of your students. Now, this example that we'll go over here only applies to reading recovery, DLL, and RR eligible reports. Literacy lessons reports have a slightly different Table 2. We will go over that in the next slide. So in this table, you will find along the right-hand side of the table the different demographic categories. The first one will be a breakdown of students by gender. The next will be a breakdown of students by meal cost, then by race ethnicity, then by whether the students have a documented disability or not. And then the final section will be whether or not the primary language spoken at home for the student is English or not. Now, just like Table 1, Table 2 has 3 years of data included in it. So we'll look at the first year of data. So these are data from 2 years ago, the 2018-19 school year. Each year will have 2 columns, an N column and a column percentage. So N is just the number of students in that category, and then the column percentage shows what percentage that represents. So if we move over to the next set of columns to the right, we have the data from the previous school year, the 2019-20 school year. And then if we move over another set of columns, we have your current school year's data, the 2021 school year. Now, this is the first table where we actually have some national data. So this is over in the last column of the chart, and you can compare the percentages if you want. So let's go ahead and do a little example. We're going to look at gender over time. You will see here, so remember, we're making observations. We're not coming to any conclusions. We're simply observing. So we can see that in this site in 2018-19, just over 50% of the 51% of the students were male, and just over 48% of the students were female. We can see that shifted just a tiny amount, up to 52 and 47% male, female. And then this year it was it was practically a 50-50 split of male and female students. And then we can see nationally that it's about a 54 to 45, if we round those, 54 to 46% split between male and female. So this site has a very similar sort of makeup of students in terms of gender. Okay, let's move over to Table 2 once again, but this time the literacy lessons version of the table. So the table should still look very familiar. We're breaking down we're showing data for the students by different demographic categories. The one difference with our literacy lessons Table 2 is that it includes data about grade levels, so the number of students served by grade level. Once we get done with that, it's the same categories as you saw in the previous Table 2. We have a breakdown by gender, by school meal cost, by race ethnicity, by the student's documented disability, and by whether or not the student's primary language at home was English. Now, just as with the same table, the previous version of Table 2, we have 3 years of data. This first column is for the 2018-19 school year. The next column is for the 2019-20 school year. And the next column is for the current school year, the 2020-21 school year. And just like the previous Table 2, this table also includes national data. So once again, let's just practice making some observations in this table. We're going to use gender once again for these data. Now, you can see in this site, so I'm going to make one quick observation about the number of students. So you can see that the number of students in this table is down in the double digits. So you can see that in 2018-19, there was 15 students, then 18 students, and then 25 students. So when we're down in our double digits, we have to remember to be a little careful about our percentages, because a small change in the number of students can have a large change in the percentages. So I think in this case, I'm just going to talk about the number of students rather than the percentages. So we can see in 2018-19 that there were 11 male students, and then 2019-20, there was 9 male students, and there was also 9 female students. So we had about a 50, well, not about, it's a 50-50 split. And then in this year, 2021, we had 14 male students and 11 female students. So in general, 2 out of 3 years, we're serving more male students than female students, and we had 1 year that was a 50-50 split between our male and female students. So I would say in general, we saw there's a little fluctuation over here, but it was nationally it's about a 60-40 split between male and female. And once again, this is kind of hovers around that. It goes in and around it a little bit. Moving on to Table 3. Table 3 shows us the intervention status of our interventions, our students in our interventions. In this first example, we are going to be looking at Table 3 for our Reading Recovery, DLL, and RR eligible reports. And then there'll be another slide for our Literacy Lessons, Table 3. So as we said, we're looking at a Reading Recovery sample here. In Table 3, we can see along the right-hand side are different intervention end of intervention statuses going down the column. And then our first year of data, 2018-19 in this example, is the next column over. And each year, You will see an N column and a column percentage. Remember that N is the count of students, and the column percentage is what percentage that N represents. And in both cases, both the N column and the column percentage add up vertically down the column. Next column over is our 2019-20 data, once again with an N and a column percentage. And then the next column is this year's data, the 2020-21 data. And then finally, once again, we have our last column, which contains our national data percentages. So let's do a quick modeling of just some observations here. We are going to look at incomplete students in this example. You can see that in this sample data in 2018-19, there were 132 students with incomplete interventions, which represented about 12% of the sites of the students that were served this year, or in 2018-19. And in 2019-20, there was 162 students, which represented 15.3% of the total students served. And then in 2020-21, there was 141 students with incomplete interventions, which represented about 13.6, almost 14% of the students served. So over the last 3 years, this cites data. The percentage of incomplete students range between 12 to just a little bit over 15%. Nationally, we see in the United States that there are about 18% of the students whose interventions are incomplete. All right, next up in our Table 3 are the Table 3s for our literacy lessons. Now, literacy lessons reports have a Table 3A and 3B. So Table 3A, which is the first example on the screen here, shows the intervention status of literacy lesson students who exited from literacy lessons during the school year. So prior to the end of the school year, prior to that April 30th. Table 3B shows the intervention status of our literacy lesson students who exited literacy lessons at the end of the school year after April 30th. So now we are going to just use Table 3B as the example here, but what we say in Table 3B applies exactly we're going to use Table 3A as our example, and what we say about 3A exactly applies to Table 3B as well. So you will see along the left-hand side of the table, the different intervention status categories. There is one row for each intervention status category. And then once again, we have our multiple years of data. So we start off with our 2018-19 data. Once again, it has an N and a column percentage. And remember that both columns add up vertically down the column. Then we have our 2019-20 data. And then our 2020-21 data. And then finally, our national data in the last column on the right. Now, let's go ahead and model, just making some observations here. So we're going to model with the first row. This is that literacy lessons or other literacy intervention no longer needed. So once again, this is a great example of where you can see we have a small numbers in here. Numbers actually less than, in most cases, less than 10. So in this case, it's probably not good to pay attention to your local percentages. We can pay attention to the national percentages because the numbers are bigger. But you can see that when we have a change in number, the percentage kind of swings wildly. So let me just model it here. So in 2018-19, we had 2 students that fell into the category that no other literacy intervention was needed. In 2019-20, that was 3 students. And in 2020-21, that went back down to 2 students. So it fluctuated just a small amount between 2 to 3 students. Nationally, we see that there were 30% of the students fell into this category. If you wanted to put that into a number, you could say 30% of 10 is 3. So about 3 students out of 3 out of 10 every students fall into this category nationally. Next up is Table 4, and Table 4 is showing us the average weeks and lessons per week for our intervention. You will find this table only for Reading Recovery, DLL, and RR eligible reports. We do not have a Table 4 for literacy lessons reports. In Table 4, you will find that it presents data for first-round students and second-round students. And then for each round, you will find one row for the different intervention statuses. So there's our first round intervention statuses and our second round intervention statuses. Then we have our 3 years of data, so you'll find our 2018-19 data in the next column. And for each year, you will find data for weeks and lessons per week. So we start with our 2018-19 data, and then we move on to our 2019-20 data, and then finally our current data, the 2020-21 data. And then in the last column, we have our national data, and you will find in national data, you will find the national averages for weeks and lessons per week. So what the typical intervention is doing. All right, so let's model doing some observation of our data. So we're going to use our first round accelerated progress students. You can see that in this sample data that the average in 2018-19, the average time that an accelerated progress student spent in reading recovery was just over 16 and a half weeks, 16.6 weeks, and they were getting about 3.8 lessons per week. In 2019-20, that was 16.7 weeks and about 3.7 lessons per week. And then in 2020 and 21, it stayed the same at 16.7 weeks and averaging about 3.7 lessons per week. We can see nationally that first round accelerated progress students typically in the typical reading recovery implementation stay in reading recovery for about 18 and a half weeks, getting about 3.7 lessons per week. So you can see in this site, they were getting students out almost 2 weeks faster than what we would see in the typical reading recovery implementation, having the same number of lessons, on average, the same number of lessons per week. All right, moving on now to our figures 1 through 7. And figures 1 through 7, you will find one figure for each task of the observation survey plus the OS total scores. So we will have 6 figures for each individual task of the OS, figures 1 through figures 6, and then a final figure 7, that is for the OS total score. Now, this set of figures will have the most diversity or the most difference amongst our different reports depending on, you'll find different versions depending on the intervention and what level is being reported. So, and we'll go over that in detail, but basically there are 4 different versions of figures 1 through figure 7. There'll be one version for our reading recovery, DLL, and RR eligible UTC state, site, and district reports. Another version for our reading recovery, DLL, and RR eligible school reports. A third version for our literacy lessons, UTC state, site, and district reports. And a final 4th version for our literacy lessons school reports. All right, so let's start with figures 1 through 7 for our RR, DLL, and RR eligible UTC state, site, and district reports. For each task of the observation survey and the total score, there will be 2 figures, a figure A for first round students and a figure B for second round students. So in our examples, we will be looking at text reading level, and text reading level is figure 1 throughout all of our reports. So there will be a figure 1A for first round students and a figure 1B for second round students. Each of these figures will have a chart and a data table. So the data table will contain the actual data that is used to make the chart, and with the data table, you will have the actual text reading level or averages for the OS score in that table. Each of these charts and the data table will contain 3 years of data plus the national data. So let's take a look at our first example. So this is an example of figure 1A, the growth on text reading level, or the progress on text reading level for our first round students. So you will see that this figure is made up of the chart on the top, and as I said, a data table on the bottom. The chart is broken down by different intervention statuses. So for example, we are showing here the data for accelerated progress students. You will see there are 4 bars for accelerated progress students. The data for those bars are down below in the data table in the 4 rows in that data table. And you also see that our bars are color-coded, so the accelerated progress students have that dark teal color. You'll see in this example, we also have purple bars for our recommended students, 4 bars for those recommended students as well, and you will see those recommended students represented by the 4 rows down in the data table. For each of our intervention groups or intervention status groups, you will find 3 years of data. So here is one. So if we look at our accelerated progress students as an example, you will see 2018-19 data, 2019-20, and 2020-21 data represented for our accelerated progress students, and then a final bar for national data from this year. And you will see those bars repeated in the recommended students. Those 3 years, 3 bars plus national data repeated over in the recommended students as well. Now, let's talk about how the bars are and the data in the chart are laid out. So at the bottom of each bar, and we're going to use the first bar on the very left-hand side of this chart, represent where students started the school year in the fall, all right? So that's the bottom of each bar, and those correspond with the fall column in the table below. You'll see in each bar there is a white line. This is our students' mid-year data, where they exited reading recovery. So this is exiting for our first round students. You'll find the actual data for the mid-year data in our mid-year column there in the data table. And then finally, the top of each bar are where students completed the school year, the end of the school year, and it's represented by the last column on the right in your data table. Here is an example of second round data. So this would be figure 1A, progress of text reading level for second round students. Has the same exact layout. With one addition, you'll see that also in this example, we also have incomplete students included in here with our pink bars. This data table has the same layout where the bottom of each bar is where students started the school year in the fall. The white line are where students started reading recovery at the middle of the school year, at mid-year, and the top of each bar is where students ended the school year at year-end at text reading level. Okay, now let's look at the variation that we have for figures 1 through 7 for our reading recovery DLL and RR eligible school reports. So once again, you will find that there is one figure for each task of the observation survey and the total score. There are 2 figures. There will be a figure A for, once again, our first round students, and a figure B, once again, for our second round students. Now, this is where our school report charts different a little bit. Each chart, once again, does come with a data table. So you'll find the chart on the top, data table on the bottom, but instead of having 3 years of data, you will find 1 year of data. Instead of having national data, you will have district data, a district data bar included on there. And you will also find that there is 1 bar for each student served on the chart, and that would also translate to 1 row in the data table for each student served. So let's look at our example. So the first thing that you're going to notice, instead of having vertical bars here, we have horizontal bars. But you will see that we still have our figure or our chart on the top, and we have our data table on the bottom. Along the left-hand side of the chart and the data table, you will see student names. Now, they are blurred out here in our example, but the student names will be there not only in the figure above, but in the data table below. You do see that we also do have our district bars. So you'll see that it says district in 2 places. So we have district data for accelerated progress students and district data for recommended students in this example on the chart. So just like our other version of the chart, the bars are color-coded, so our accelerated progress students are grouped together, and they have that have a purple color to them. And you will also see that they are grouped together in the data table below. You will also see that our recommended students are grouped together, and notice how each of those groups has district data along with that. Now, with the slightly different layout, our bars have a slightly different representation. Fall data are where the bars start on the left-hand side of the chart, and the actual scores are down there in the fall column in the data table. Our mid-year data are where the white line appears in the bar on the chart, and that corresponds with the mid-year column down in the data table. And then finally, year-end data are the top, or are at the very right-hand side of the chart, and those correspond to the values found in the year-end column down in the data table. Okay, we are moving on to literacy lessons reports, and specifically we're going to talk about figures 1 through 7 for literacy lessons, UTC, state, site, and district report. So just like our previous examples, you will find one figure for each task of the observation survey. The difference here is you will just find one figure. There will not be a data table because we don't report it by, we don't have first or second round students for our literacy lessons interventions. Another difference is that these data show entry and exit data, whereas our previous charts show fall, mid-year, and year-end data. So these charts will show entry and exit data, and you will see one set of bars for each grade level. So you'll see a set of bars for first graders, a set of bars for second graders, for each of the grade levels if you that you have in your implementation. So each of these figures 1 through 7, will have 3 years of data, so you can see how you change over time, national data, so you can compare yourself to the typical literacy lessons intervention, and instead of having the data table below, the scores that represent the entry and exit scores are shown inside of the bars. So let's take a look. So here we go. Here is our first example of literacy lessons data. So you will notice right now that I've highlighted, or I'm trying to show how our bars are grouped by grade level. So right now I've got all of our first grader bars highlighted. Then we've got bars for our second graders right there, more bars for our third graders, and a final set of bars for our fourth graders. And if you have fifth graders would have been included on here as well. You will notice that for each grade level, you will have 3 years of data. At the bottom bar in each group will be the 2018-19 data. The middle bar will be the 2019-20 data. The next bar up will be our 2020-21 data. And the final bar on top in each group will be national data. Entry scores are on the left-hand side, so the leftmost side of each bar are where students entered literacy lessons, and the right side, or the rightmost side of each bar, is where students exited. So you probably can't see it. It probably didn't highlight very well, but I'm going to make my mouse come over here, and hopefully you can see my mouse. Let's get my mouse here, right here. I'm going to highlight it now. The values for... So, for example, we're looking at fourth grade data from the 2019-20 school year. You can see the actual values that represent this bar are in the bar. So students entered at an average of a 9.5 and exited at an average of 19. So they entered at a 9.5 and they exited at a 19 over here. So those values are inside of the bars. All right, and finally, we are moving on to figures 1 through 7 for our literacy lessons school reports. So once again, we've got for each task, there's one figure for each task of the observation survey and total score. And just like our previous example, there is only just one figure. There's no accompanying data table. And once again, since we don't have first round and second round students in literacy lessons, there's just one figure. Just like our last example, the charts will show entry and exit data. And there will be one bar for each student by grade level. All right. Now, where we differ a little bit from the previous literacy lessons chart is that each figure will only have 1 year of data. Instead of national data, it will have district data. And then just like the old chart, the data for each of these students and the district data, the data will be shown inside of the actual scores will be shown inside of the bars. So let's go ahead and take a look at our example. So here is our example of our school level growth we're looking at text reading level once again. Specifically in this example, they only had in this school literacy lessons, they only served second graders. So you can see we only have second grade bars. The student names are listed along the left-hand side there. Once again, they're just blurred out in this example, and you can see their bars just across from them on the chart. Like the last chart, the bars are turned horizontally instead of vertically, so we can fit a little more of our students on there. And then finally, above all of the student data, you will see that bar for district data as well, so you can compare students to their growth to students across the district. Like I said, entry scores are on the left-hand side of this figure. This is where our kids entered literacy lessons, and their exit scores are at the rightmost side of the bar on the right-hand side of the figure. So if you look here where my mouse is at, you will see, like I said earlier in the previous slide, that the data that is used to make this bar is inside of the bar and not in the table below. So for example, for this student in second grade, they entered literacy lessons at a 3. So you can see that this starting spot corresponds to a 3 on the chart, and they exited at a 12. So you can see that it corresponds to the 12 down there at a bottom. So the data for the students are inside of the bar, and the averages are for the district are inside of the bar as well. All right, moving on to Table 5. Table 5 shows the count of reading recovery students by year-end text level and intervention status. And you will find this table in our RR, DLL, and RR eligible reports only for UTC state, site, district, and school reports. So there is no comparable table for our literacy lessons students. You will only find this in all of our reading recovery, DLL, and RR eligible reports. So let's take a look at the design of the table here. So along the left-hand side of the table, you will find one row for each of our end of program statuses. Actually, you'll only find that this table reports for only accelerated progress, progressed, recommended, and incomplete students. Along the top of the table, you will find the different text reading levels. So you see on the left-hand side, it starts with 5 or below, and then goes 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and then finally a final column for 20 and above. And then in the center, this is where you will find the count of students who got that year-end text reading level. So remember, this is a count of students by year-end text reading level. So let's do a quick data demonstration here. I'm going to focus on the incomplete students, and this is an anomaly that sort of caught my attention when I looked at this sample data. So if you look at the last row, incomplete students, the far last two right-hand columns there, you will see that in this sample data, we had 2 incomplete students who finished at an 18 or above. So one student that was at an 18 at the end of the school year, and then a final student who was marked as incomplete as a 20 and above. So there's an example of how we can sort of, what I would think, sort of spot sort of some anomalous data within our results. Okay, next up we are going to be looking at or talking about tables 6A and 6B. I am just going to show one table as an example because 6A and 6B have the same exact design. They just are going to be reporting on different students. So table 6A will show data for first round recommended students, and table 6B will show data for first round progressed students. And you will only find table 6A and 6B in reading recovery, DLL, and RR eligible UTC state, site, district, and school reports. So tables 6A and 6B are not in any literacy lessons reports. They're just in for any of our reading recovery, DLL, and RR eligible reports. So let's go ahead and look at an example. So here we go, an example of table 6A, and remember, whatever I say here applies exactly to table 6B as well. Table 6B is just looking at progressed students rather than recommended students. But in this example of 6A, we are looking at first round recommended reading recovery students by different text level scenarios. So along the left-hand side of the chart, you will see one row for each different text level scenario, and those scenarios are children who at the middle of who were at a text level of 5 or below at mid-year, at the middle of the school year. The next row will show data for students who are at between a 6 and 9 on their text level at the mid-year. The next row will be students who were between a 10 and 12 at mid-year, and then the final row is a group of students that were 9 or below at mid-year, but reached 12 by the end of the school year. So 4 different scenarios there, one line for each scenario. You will see that this table has 3 years of data in it. So the first column will be 2018-19 data. The next column will be 2019-20 data. Now, let me just say, some of you might be worried that, oh, last year was a real mess. I can't use this. Remember, this was first-round students. We got good data on first-round students. School didn't really shut down until, right in the middle of the second round. So you can still use your 2019-20 data for your first-round students. So it's okay to do some comparison of this data with other years. And then finally, we have one last column for the 2020-21 data right there. And then on the far right-hand side of the table, just like many of our other tables, we have national data where you can do some comparison. Now, I forgot to mention earlier that each of our school year, let's get that off here. Each of our school years, you'll have an end column and a percentage column. So remember, our ends just show the count of students, and the percentage column just shows what percentage of students that represents. So let me go ahead and do a quick modeling of interpreting some data. So we're going to focus on the first row here, and these are students, recommended students who were 5 or below at the middle of the school year. Back in 2018-19, in this sample data, there were 9 students who were 9 recommended students who were 5 or below at the mid-year. 5 students in 2019 and 20 that were 5 and below at the middle of the school year. And this year they had 4 students that were 5 or below at the middle of the school year. So there seems to be a downward trend in the number of recommended students that were 5 and below at the middle of the school year. So we're moving on to Figure 8, and Figure 8 shows a text reading level growth comparison of your local data to national data. So this chart is only available for Reading Recovery, DLL, and RR eligible UTC, state, site, district, and school reports. There is no comparable table for literacy lessons reports. So let's go ahead and let's take a closer look at Figure 8 here. So just like some of our figures earlier, this figure has 2 parts to it. It actually has a chart, and then it has a data table at the bottom just showing the same data that's up in the chart, just in numerical format. So let's look at the lines. The first line we're going to look at is this dark purple solid line with the squares. This would be your first round accelerated progress students, their growth from fall to mid-year to year-end. The next line, these would be, which is our solid pink line with the triangles, these would be your second round accelerated progress students. The next line, this light purple dashed line with the squares, these are national first round accelerated progress students. And then we have our light pink dashed line with triangles. These are the national second round accelerated progress students. And then finally, the light blue line with the circle, the dashed line with the circle, these are the national random sample representing the typical first grader in the United States. So let's go ahead and let's do a little observation of some of the data in here. So we're going to take a look at second round students. And if you look at the local second round students, the students on the solid line with the triangles, and compare it to the national second round students, which is the dashed line with the triangle, you can see in general in these sample data, the second round students are coming in lower than what we would see typically for national second round students. So locally, these students are coming in at about a 1. Nationally, they would come in at about a 1.9, and you can just round that up to a 2. So around a 2. Just like our typical second rounders, while they're waiting to get reading recovery, they kind of make that limited growth while they're waiting for reading recovery, and then they get it at the middle of the school year, and they make that explosive growth up to the end of the school year. And this is another thing I really want to focus on and point out. We can see, if you look at here is where our first round accelerated progress students finished at the end of the school year, and here is where our second round accelerated progress students finished at the school year. So in these sample data, we can see that our second round kids accelerated past our first round kids by the end of the school year, fully closing that gap with a random sample, and just finishing just a tad below where we would see the typical second round and first round student at the end of the school year. But all in all, a very positive result. And finally, we have our last table of the session here. This is Table 7, and Table 7 looks at school implementation data by implementation level. And this Table 7 is only for reading recovery, DLL, and RR eligible UTC, state, site, district, and school reports. So we do not have a version of Table 7 for literacy lessons. So before I get into it, I just want to talk about Table 7 is a brand new table this year. We've not had something like this before in our reports, and like anything new, this is a bit of an experiment. And so it's a new way maybe of trying to think about implementation level. So in the past, I feel like we've had this sort of binary relationship with implementation, that fully implemented is good and under implemented is bad. And I think that this is there's more nuance to this question. And I say it like this because implementation is something, the number of reading recovery teachers at a school is a lot of times beyond the control of a reading recovery teacher leader. So I think a better question to ask about our school implementations is this: given the resources available, are implementations operating as efficiently as they can be? And so to try to help answer this question, this table, like a lot of the other tables in this report, use national data to show what a typical implementation looks like. It's even a little more detailed than that. As we will see, this table breaks it down by different implementation levels, and it gives you national data for each implementation level. So let's go ahead, let's dive in here to Table 7, and let's take a look at that together. All right, so here's Table 7, school implementation data by implementation level. So you will see in this example, along the left-hand side, a list of different implementation levels, okay, along with the name of schools and national data included. So for example, up at the top here, we have a section that will be just for under-implemented schools with 4 teachers. Now, you may not have all of these implementation levels. It's just in this example, this example data has this many types of different implementations. They then have fully implemented schools with 3 teachers, under-implemented schools with 2 teachers, fully implemented schools with 2 teachers, over-implemented schools with 2 teachers, under-implemented schools with 1 teacher, and fully implemented schools with 1 teacher. So you may not have all these implementation, but our sample data do, all right? So the next thing that you will see, and we're going to use this section where we have our under-implemented schools with 1 teacher, you will notice that in each of those implementation sections, there is a row that is called national. So this is national data. So specifically in this section, this is national data for under-implemented schools with 1 teacher. So this can give you a sense, schools that have 1 teacher and are still under-implemented, what should they be doing, or how efficiently should they be operating? And then your data, the schools that fit into that implementation scenario are listed under the national data. So you can see in this example, this cites SAMP schools. There were 6 schools that are under-implemented with 1 teacher. So we try to use a couple performance indicators to try to say how efficiently our implementations are going. So we're going to look at the total number of students served. This includes all students. So accelerated progress, progressed, recommended, moved, none of above, and incomplete students. Just the total number of students served. Who are we reaching as many students as we possibly can? The next column over looks at the number of students who made accelerated progress. And then finally, the last column shows a count of students who reached a year-end text reading level of 16 or higher. Okay, so those kids who are hopefully going into 2nd grade well prepared to read in 2nd grade. So let's do a bit of scaffolding here. Let's go back to our section of this example data of under-implemented schools with one teacher. Nationally, this is real data from this year, folks. A lot of you have been telling me that many of reading recovery teachers aren't serving a full load of students, and we can start to see this. And I'm saying this because if we look at the number of students served, we can see nationally, it says that under-implemented schools with one teacher, this year nationally, on average, they served about 6 students. They got 2 students made accelerated progress, and then in the last column, they had 1 student reaching a text level of 16. So now, let's look at the next row. This is the first school in this section. This would be your first local school that for your local data, and let's interpret this data. So we can see at school 8 here that they actually had a chance. The teacher actually served 10 students, so above 6 students that we saw nationally. The teacher at this school got 4 students to make accelerated progress, and 5 of her students reached text reading level 16 or higher by the end of the school year. So this is not just accelerated progress students. I don't know this by looking at it, but I think the next question is, Jeff, this year-end text reading level 16 or higher, is this just accelerated students? No, it's any student who made a text level 16 or higher. So you can see that this, at school 8 here, that it looks like things are going pretty well at this school. The school numbers are above all of the performance indicators. Now let me move down to the next school, school 9. And I forgot to highlight the whole row here, but you can see school 9 served a total of 8 students this year. But what I have boxed out here is that they had 0 students making accelerated progress and 0 students reaching a text level 16. So we can see that they sort of were below 2 of the national indicators. We would at least have expected 2 students to make accelerated progress and 1 student to reach a text level 16. So now you're probably noticing these downward pointing red arrows. So when a school doesn't meet an indicator, it puts a down arrow next to that number. All right, so that way you can sort of quickly see which schools are not meeting the sort of these indicators. So this report's a bit sort of like it takes it's designed from medical diagnostic reports. The medical diagnostic reports sort of don't tell you about good or bad. They just give you information to let you start inferring things about what you see. And so this chart is not really meant to give you a specific set of answers about what's happening. It's just trying to give you a different set of insight into your data. How should we use Table 7? All right, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think a good place to start is starting with schools with 3 down arrows. If you have some schools that have 3 down arrows, so if we go back to our example, do we have any 3 down arrows here? We don't. But if you have schools with 3 down arrows, then I would say do some further inquiry. So go to that school report and look inside a school report and see what is going on and do some further inquiry. Then you can go to the schools with 2 down arrows. And if you have schools with 2 down arrows, you can do some further inquiry on those schools. And then finally, if you were surprised by a school's implementation level, like if you thought something was fully implemented and it turned out to be under-implemented or something vice versa, do some further inquiry. All right, everyone, we made it to the end. Give yourself a round of applause. That was a lot of data and charts and tables today. Congratulations. Hey, before we get to our closing slide, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, go ahead and click that subscribe button over there so you can be alerted to new I Love Data Fridays videos and other videos from the International Data Evaluation Center. All right, thank you everyone for watching another episode of I Love Data Fridays. I hope you're as excited about these new tables and figures as I am. I hope to see everybody at the Teacher Leader Institute, but until then, we We'll talk data to you later.